So good. Be greeting one another in the house. I see people crossing back and forth across the room. They find somebody they want to say hello to, give a hug to. I see one spouse dragging their spouse back to their seat. Honey, it's time. We got to get back to our seat. Well, we're going to continue in our series of God Is, looking at God's character. But first, let me highlight a couple of exciting events that happened this past week. On Thursday evening, I was here with close to 25 of our worship leaders, the folks who you see leading on a Sunday morning in our service. And I got to join them for a time where we just slowed the pace of life down on Thursday night, and we took time to talk about God's vision for us as a house, and God's vision of us showing and sharing the love of Jesus Christ. And we took time to talk about the culture that we've been building here at Koinonia and how the worship team, they meet as a smaller group because they want to carry that vision when they come here to this platform on Sunday. They're not just showing up with their great voices or their instrument capability. They humble themselves outside of this time so they can come here and say, oh God, may you use us to lead the congregation, the church body, as we worship you. So Thursday night was exciting to be a part of. Friday night was a night of intercessory prayer, some time to gather and pray together. And we had close to 50 people gather in the Impact Center to come and intersperse between prayer and times of worship. And we prayed out corporately, like all together at the same time. We took time to pray one-on-one with a partner in a small group setting. And then we prayed over specific ministries that we have here at Koinonia. And again, what encourages me out of those nights of prayer is hearing others as they pray out or as they testify. This is what I sense God stirring up in me and in us as a church. And those are great moments to just be a part of and hear. And I set you up for that because the next one you're going to have to wait now till January unless you spontaneously plan your own gathering. But in January, at the beginning of our prayer and fasting week, we'll have another corporate gathering to pray. And I want to encourage you to come together for that. But one last note I want to highlight this morning is I'm going to be absent from here the next 2 Sundays. I get an opportunity to travel with Dwayne Harder. Dwayne is one of our spiritual fathers here in the house, and he invited me. Actually, I asked, can I come and just carry your suitcases, Dwayne? Carry your Bible as you teach. And so we're traveling to Central Asia, to a country that's going to remain unnamed this morning, but a country and an opportunity to speak with couples and bring encouragement. And I was just looking to be in on Dwayne's teaching, but he said, oh no, Brian, if you're going to be with me, you're going to be in on this teaching. And so I'm excited for that. And another gentleman, Jim, coming from Ohio to join us for a week. So I travel next Saturday, and we'll be returning the following Sunday. And I ask you to pray over us. Pray for God's wisdom. Pray for, you can pray for the luggage. That's kind of secondary, but I would like to arrive with some clothes there. But pray that just the Spirit of God will be upon us to get through the different stages that we need to get to the people and meet with them. Because we know, again, there's an enemy that wants to thwart the truth and keep the light in the darkness, but he can't. And so we're going to come shining the light. So I thank you for just in advance jumping in and praying next week. When you don't see me here, we'll still be active in ministry. This morning, our series, God Is, we're going to look specifically at the characteristic of God is just. And in a few moments, I'm going to take us back to where we were last Sunday morning and pick up on God is holy and lead into God is just. If you haven't been tracking with us in this series, you can go to our YouTube channel. And we have our messages are recorded there. And I went back and I saw this week there are just under 1,000. There's 963 subscribers to our YouTube channel. Now, I know some of those people subscribed and then they wandered away, But as of yesterday, there were 168 views of last Sunday's message. So outside of the people in this room and gathering, there are many who are tuning in online, who are saying, I couldn't be in the room to hear the message, but I want to be part of what God's doing in my church family. And so know that we are a part of a movement that God is stirring up that he calls his church. And it's exciting to be. Open to Luke 18. Luke 18 is where I want to bring the first introduction to God is just. and gives some context. And here in Luke 18, Jesus tells a parable about a persistent widow. He tells a story about, he gives it as an illustration to say, hey, I've got something to teach you, and I'm going to use this as an example. And so Luke 18, the first 6 verses, you'll be introduced here to an unjust judge first. Jesus told his disciples a parable to show them that they should always pray and not give up. That's the context of his teaching. He said, in a certain town, there was a judge who neither feared God or cared about men. And there was a widow in the town who kept coming to him and would plead, grant me justice against my adversary. For some time he refused, but finally he said to himself, even though I don't fear God or care about men, yet because this widow keeps bothering me, I will see that she gets justice, so that she won't eventually wear me out with her coming. And the Lord said to his disciples, listen to what the unjust judge says. And will not God bring about justice for his chosen ones, who cry out to him day and night? Will he keep putting them off? I tell you, he will see that they get justice, and quickly. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? I share that passage as kind of a setup to this topic of God's character of being a just God. Jesus first talks about what an unjust judge or ruler is like. And in this example that Jesus gives, we can see that this unjust judge did not rule based on God's principles or his ways. Jesus said he didn't even care about God. He doesn't fear God. And this judge does not rule thinking about people and caring about people. He could care less about people is what we seem to get the implication of. But what he responded with is, oh man, I just got to make my life easier. I got to do something to quiet this woman up. So I'm going to give a verdict here, and maybe that'll just get... So you could see an unjust ruler rules with themselves as the top of the priority list. It's all about me. But then Jesus shifts and he says, but God, implying that God is also one who rules and leads and will bring about a verdict in situations. And God, as he comes, he rules with justice and compassion to those who cry out. He will do this for those who he has chosen and who have come to him. And it says, Jesus said, he'll do it quickly. But know that at the very end, the very last verse I read, verse 6, what is God looking for from us as we come to him? He's looking to see, will there still be faith when I return? Hang on to that element as I introduce God being just. And we're going to come back to it before we finish this message this morning. I highlight this teaching, the teaching that Jesus is bringing, because I want to bring attention to how God operates and how God functions. Many people think God doesn't show up on their timing, right? We think, oh, God, that was yesterday. I needed you to do that. Or we don't think God shows up in the way we want him to. Well, no, God, it's obvious. Why don't you just do this and it will make my life better? And there's a whole lot of people who are watching my life, so if I'm better, then they'll be better for it. You know, we have all these expectations and thoughts that we cast back toward God. Or sometimes when we're experiencing life and it doesn't seem fair, life just doesn't seem fair, then we begin to say there can't be a God because we equate fairness with justice. And therefore, so there can't be a God if my life is not going fairly as I would like it to. This morning, 2 areas I'm going to focus on. First, I want to highlight, what does it mean that God is just? We're going to look at the verses that highlight that. Then the second aspect I want to focus on this morning is then what does God desire of us? If he's a just God, what does he desire of us? So, taking us back to last Sunday, God is holy. God's holiness. Remember when he said, be holy because I am holy. Leviticus 19, it was declared, God was quoted Peter repeated it in 1 Peter chapter 1. Be holy because I am holy. We heard last Sunday that God makes it possible for us to be holy because he is holy. I talked about how our part is to choose to follow God. Say, God, I want to follow you, the holy God. And then his part is to bring his holy presence. And as we say, yes, we want to receive you, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, he fills us with his Holy Spirit. That's God's part. And God then is making us holy to live a holy life, to be pure in our thoughts, in our activities, in our actions, to walk in his ways. And God being holy means he's set apart. I talked about that last Sunday. He's sacred. He is without evil. And I say, Lord, then let that be me. You see, the context of God's purity and holiness is what sets us up for understanding God is just. Do you remember me saying last Sunday that what is impure or what is sinful can't be in the presence of God? It would be consumed if we were there because God cannot be in the presence of evil. And so when we come to this learning about God being just, his justice flows out of his holiness. His righteousness flows out of his holiness. And it's important for us to understand that. So God's not just showing up saying, oh, I wonder how I'll rule today. That's how we humanly might think we would rule. But God shows up and I'm going to lead out of my holiness. I'm going to lead to bring people to righteousness and truth. And this is some of the reality for us to understand of God. So let's look at a verse that highlights God being just. Deuteronomy chapter 32 is the context I'm going to take us to, specifically verse 4. And I often say, you guys are incredible if you can listen to me and you can absorb everything I say. Man, good on you. I encourage you to take some notes. At least if you're like, I'm not a note taker, at least write down the verse that I'm talking about, right? Because later on, the Holy Spirit might say, hey, remember that verse on Sunday morning? You're like, shoot, I didn't write it down. So this is your reminder, write it down. Deuteronomy 32:4. And if you want to write down more than just the verse, then write on. 32:4, this is what the verse says. He is the rock, referring to God. His works are perfect, and all his ways are just. A faithful God who does no wrong. Upright and just is he. Now let me give you the context of verse 4. This is Moses who crafted these words. Many of us are familiar with Moses, his relationship with God. I talked about it last week. So again, go back last week and you'll learn about when Moses was introduced to God. But Moses is writing these words, and if you read the chapters that are around chapter 32, you will discover that this was just after Moses had written down the laws of God, the principles to operate by. What will bring you life? He had just had it written down. And Moses, in this time, it was near the end of his life. That's what we understand is happening. And as he wrote down the law of God, they said, read this. Every 7 years, draw the whole assembly together. Read it out so you don't forget any part of it. And then in between those 7-year periods, live by the law that God has given. So we come to this chapter 32, and we see it titled as the Song of Moses. This is the first song that came out of Moses' family. Do you remember his brother Aaron and his sister Miriam wrote a song after the parting of the Red Sea and God leading the people through? They wrote a song. Now it's Moses' turn to write a song. And God said, write it down, recite it for the people so they can hear it and declare it. I don't know if he sang it or if he read it. I don't know. But it's a song. And he starts it with these words. He says, let all heaven and earth hear my words. Take note of the words coming off my lips when I speak this to you. Then he said, may this teaching that I give you in this song be like fresh rain. We got some fresh rain this weekend. But the rain he's talking about, fresh rain that comes that will water the plants, that will help the plants grow. In other words, my words are going to be like life and growth to you. They're going to feed you. And in verse 3 of chapter 32, Moses declares the name of the Lord. In English, look at it. In our English Bibles, it's capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. That's the English translation of the name Yahweh. Once again, Moses is referring to who God truly is. Yahweh, Jehovah, that sacred name. And then verse 4. And here's where he says, God, he is a rock. And God is often referred to as a rock. Have you noticed that? It's not because of his physique, all right? It's not because he's won some bodybuilding competitions. God was called the Rock long before any wrestler or Hollywood star was called the Rock. You get it? God is called a rock because of what his character is. He is solid. He is unmovable. He doesn't change with shifting shadows. He isn't swayed by the culture of the day or by popular opinion or to get the most votes. No. God is a rock already. And Moses and many others came and said, oh, wow, this is who God is. He is unmovable. He is steady and true to his principles. And not only did Moses say that, David also said it. So we got Moses, then down through history, we've got David, King David. And my favorite chapter of David speaking out is Psalm 18, where it begins and he says, oh, Lord, my rock, you are my strength. You're my fortress and my refuge. I take shelter in you, God. Who do you take shelter in? Is it someone who's a rock, or is it a cardboard little shack that you take shelter in? Moses and David said, he is a rock. He's unmovable. He is steady. And this concept of God being a rock and God being just, it goes so well together. Because one who is just cannot move, cannot change opinion, cannot sway with the times. The God who is just needs to be steady and applicable through all generations. And so that's why Moses puts these words together, saying he is a rock that you can hang on to and you can trust. Moses testified to this truth. David declared it. Go back even before them was Jacob also said it. You can see it in Jacob's words as well. Yeah, it's in Genesis somewhere. It's just not jumping off the page, but Jacob said it. Go back and find it. He also said, God is a rock. And so as these guys testify to it, that God is reliable, consistent, he's honest, and he's true, you can count on that. You can take shelter in this truth. When life and many polarizing topics are bombarding you, you can come to God the rock and get aligned and hear what his truth is. These men testify to it, but I want you not to just take their word for granted. I want you to meet the rock, the God who is just, and press into him for yourself. Moses continued his song. He said, God's works are perfect. God's works are perfect. And so is his word. His word is perfect. And all his ways are just. Again, remember the context of chapter 32 is right in the midst of the law that was given, God's law that was spoken out in chapter 31, that the people are to live by. This is the context and setting when Moses says, and God's ways are perfect. A God who is just has to have perfect ways. They've got to be steady and without fault. His works are perfect, and they work perfectly in our lives, and they work for our benefit as God works in us. And God says, what Moses is saying about God's works being perfect is to lead us toward life. If you back up to chapter 30, another life verse for me in chapter 30 is when God says to the people, tell the people to choose life or death. I set both before them. Here they are. The choice is up to you to pick it. If we choose life and go, we're going to follow with the rock. We'll follow God's perfect ways, and we're going to experience it. Doesn't mean we're going to walk perfectly, but our eyes are going to be on a perfect God who is going to lead us in his truth and his holiness for us to experience as well. Let me keep taking you through this verse. He is the faithful God who does no wrong. There is no one else like God. He is faithful and he does not make mistakes. Have you heard that before? Often it's quoted or applied to you as a person, saying, no, don't put yourself down. God does not make mistakes. This is some of the truth of where it comes from. Moses made mistakes. Oh yeah, it's right in this context where God's also saying, Moses, you're not going to be coming into the promised land because of a mistake you made. But God does not make mistakes. Earthly kings make mistakes. Prime ministers make mistakes. That shouldn't surprise you. Presidents make mistakes. Leaders, we make mistakes. But a God who is faithful does no wrong. He is upright, Moses includes at the end of this verse. He is upright. And I think it's strategic that Moses is declaring these words toward the end of his life. He knew his days were now numbered because God was taking the people into the promised land and he knew he wasn't going in, so his time on earth was coming to an end. And if you read Psalm 92, verse 15, it talks about even those who are well on in years, the righteous who are well on in years, still declare that no wickedness is found in God. Now, I don't know how close you are to being well on in years. Some in this room are more well on than others. Are you still saying, oh, absolutely, Church Koinonia, I need to tell you, in my 70 years, or my 80 years, or my 90 years, I want you to know there's no wickedness found in God. We need to take note from those who've gone before us, who've lived longer than us, who've experienced God in more ways than we have in our 30, 40, or more years. We need to see, God, what are you saying through them? And they're saying, oh, God is still upright, and he is just. Now, I could spring forward this morning, and I could take us to how God dealt with sin, the mistake of all time from mankind. Adam and Eve inviting sin into this world. And if I were to bring the God who is just to that context, we see his justice flowing out where he said, it is so important that we deal with sin. Let's deal with it now, once and for all time. And God said there needs to be a price paid for this sin. There needs to be a sacrifice offered for this sin. This is how justice will be brought about. He wouldn't let sin go unpunished. A sacrifice had to be paid. And so he said, I'm going to send the perfect sacrifice. The pure, spotless lamb, my one and only Son, Jesus Christ. Because I cannot be in the presence of sin, but I want to be in the presence of the people who I've created. I created you to be in relationship with me. But now we can't because there's this divide between us. But I will make a way for you so that you can come into my presence, so we can be in relationship again. And he sent the bridge builder, the sacrifice, the perfect lamb that would go on the altar, Jesus. And through that offering, God said the punishment for sin has been paid. All the punishment and pain, all that the verdict for our sin was heaped on Jesus Christ on the cross. That's why his sorrow was so great. That's why his death was so short up on that cross. Sometimes criminals would live for days gasping for air, but Jesus had all of our weight. And God said, that's enough. It is finished now. Sin has been paid for. If God didn't require a sacrifice for sin, it would be like he was just kind of, let's just let your harmful deeds, let's just kind of put them behind us. Let's just let bygones be bygones. That would be a God who compromised. Would you want to follow a God like that? God is one who's come and said, no, I require a price to be paid for sin so that then I can declare you as righteous and just in my sight. That's the kind of God that I want to follow. But the Israelites, like us, they're not so different. Don't judge the Israelites too quickly. When you look at them and say, how could they not follow God so faithfully and committed? Like, why do they keep messing up and making mistakes and going through the same cycle of life again? God would probably side with you and go, yeah, why do they? But then he'd say, but why do you? And so God sent prophets to us to remind us of his ways, that he is just and he is true. And those prophets would speak out and say, oh, people, follow God's ways. Remember Moses' song. Remember what God's done for his people. He wants to still be faithful and be your God as well. He sent a prophet named Jeremiah. And Jeremiah was speaking out to the Israelites in this kind of context as well. And I bring our attention to Jeremiah 6, verse 16. Again, if you want to grab a verse to read later, 6:16, Jeremiah. And Jeremiah says this, stand at the crossroads and look. Ask for the ancient paths. Ask where the good way is and walk in it. And you will find rest for your souls. I'm not going to unpack the context of Jeremiah 6 or all the book of Jeremiah, but he's a prophet sent by God to redirect people back to God's ways. And what he's essentially saying to the people that is applicable to us as well is you will come to a crossways in life. You will come to a spot in life and you will say, it's not fair. I don't like what's being done to my life. I don't like what's being done to my country or being done to our generation. We will get to that crossways. And God says, I've set before you some ancient paths, some timeless principles. If you will follow them, at the end of that and through that journey, you're going to experience life. If you choose the other path, well, you're on your own. And Israel, again and again, not because they are worse than us, they were just as human as us. They got there and they were like, but it doesn't seem fair. This seems like the better option, the quicker solution. I'm going to get what I need if I go this way. The word ancient in Hebrew is olam. Ancient comes from the Hebrew word olam. That means from the remote past to the remote future. It means world, existence, lifetime, eternity. There's a variety of meanings to this word ancient. It means indefinite futurity. That's the word future with ity put on the end of it. And which means something that's coming in the future, on the horizon. I like Craig Hill's definition of this phrase, ancient past. He says it's the ways of God, the universal, timeless principles of life. That's what ancient is. So if you put ancient with path, what you get is timeless principles of God that will simply make life worth living and a whole lot more enjoyable. If we choose at the crossways to follow the just God who's before us, he will bring life to you. Jeremiah said, if you choose to follow in the timeless ways of God, he will find rest for your soul, your mind, will, and emotion. Is there anyone in the room, and you don't need to put your hand up, is there anyone watching and connecting with us online that needs rest for your mind this week? There's anyone who needs rest and peace over decisions that you have to make. Do I go this way or do I go that way? Do you need some divine presence spoken into your emotions? Because your emotions are fragile and stirred up, and they switch from anger to hatred and back and forth. And you're like, how do I get a hold of these? Jeremiah said it. Jesus repeats it. Follow the Father's timeless principles for life. The God who is just has laid out a map for you. And as you walk in it, then he will bring peace to your heart and your soul. But we are so tempted to follow the other, aren't we? And we ignore the no exit sign. We ignore the dead end. We ignore that this route is temporary. And we say, I'm sure it's going to fix the situation that I need for my life. It's not. Israel will tell you. Jeremiah will tell you. Moses, David, they continue to shout out to our generation saying, follow God's ancient principles for life because they will bring rest for your soul. So think about this for yourself a little deeper this morning. If and when you feel like you are treated unfairly, like life is just not fair, you're experiencing some unneeded suffering, your emotions or thoughts are just too much and you're searching for an outlet, where will you go? Where will you go when you get to that crossroads? Some go to unhealthy eating and say, I just can't, I'm just going to eat some comfort food because that's going to take care of me and get me through the weekend. And it does, but then all of a sudden, I feel horrible. Why did I do that to myself? Ever say that? Don't answer it loud, okay? What are some other comforts? Distraction. We pour ourselves into other things. It's a coping technique. Sometimes we think that workaholics are the champions of all time. But some workaholics bury themselves in work so they don't have to deal with what else is going on at home or in relationships. Or distraction, we binge on entertainment. I just need to find a good love story or a good romantic or something where they live happily ever after, because I'm not experiencing that right now. But that movie's over in an hour and a half. Is your happily ever after found in that movie? I'm not knocking movies altogether. I'm just talking about, where do we go when we're looking for our comforts? Sometimes we press in and pour really good content, but we just keep pouring it into ourselves. If I just keep eating and feeding on this will be good. But if it never gets applied to the heart and it stays up here, then it's temporary. Or we go to unhealthy absorptions of content. Pornography, you name whatever that is unhealthy. And we say, I just need a fix because this relationship isn't working or this isn't being responded to. But all those things are temporary. Addictive substances, alcohol, drugs, whether it's drugs sold on the street or drugs given over the counter. We can easily find comfort in those things when life is stressful. I know for me, in the first months of the pandemic as a leader here at Koinonia, it was stressful. I had many wrestling, sleepless nights. I felt the weight of the pressure. I feel it when what you're going through, our staff, as we'd talk, I'd feel that. And I'd wake up sometimes with heaviness on my chest. I'd feel like when I'd wake up in the middle of the night and I could feel like my heart was already wanting to run and race. And I'm like, 3 a.m, heart, what are you doing? And I'm like, this is not healthy. I shared it with our elders, with our teams, so they knew. We prayed, we worshiped, we trusted in God. And we continued to do those things. And eventually I gave my family doctor a call. And I said, hey, you know that thing you call a sleeping pill? I think I'm maybe due for one of those. And so she did. She gave me the lessons on them. She taught me about them, talked about the addiction of them. But she said, so I'm going to give it to you, but you have to administer it yourself. Now, some might say, Brian, that's lacking faith. No, I didn't give up and abandon my faith in my God. But what I realized with that sleeping pill is I was able to not think about anything for 8 hours. And I recognized, I got better frame of mind and heart. And I woke up, and then I entered into some walk with God. I said, God, I'm not going to rely on a sleeping pill every night. I'm going to rely on you every night. If there's a time you want to minister that, you tell me when. And so I've been very disciplined in this application. But a sleeping pill can't be applied every time I have stress, or every time I'm challenged. If it was a Sunday morning and I took a sleeping pill at 8 o'clock, you guys would notice right about now. The first week I might have get away with it. He's just anointed. He's just lying there. Don't disturb him. God's speaking through him right now. But any temporary fix is just that. It's temporary. It's not an ancient path. God calls us to walk in his ways. So how about you and the stress that you're walking out? Let me bring this down then for our application this morning. God is just. And out of that fact, how does he call you to respond to him? What is his desire? His desire is for you to trust in him. Trust in him as the God who has the ways that are perfect, has timeless principles that have been tested and tried, and some have given up on them. But there are ways that will bring rest for your soul, and they will bring life to you and to your family. The first thing we can do in responding to a just God is trust him. He's been around a whole lot longer than we have. Amen? The second thing we can do, he desires this, is that you would cling to him. Cling to the rock. That means go to him daily. Go to him more than just once a day. Go to him regularly and cling to the rock. When you are frustrated, when you are discouraged, when you are stressed, when you don't know how to handle a situation, cling to the rock, the God who's just. But I've got to tell them what's wrong with them. I've got to fix this person. I got to change this situation. Cling to the rock first. Let the rock minister to your soul. My God, who is my rock and my fortress. He is just, and I can trust him. That even though the group's leaning to a different outcome than I like, I can trust my God that he's at work. And he's going to bring about his timeless ways. We can fully submit to God. God who is just can be fully submitted to, 100% yield to, completely trusting in our God. We sang a song this morning, the names of God. And your names, God, they say it all. And we're going to go back in just a few minutes. The team's coming in. Come on. Oh, the team's getting set up. We're going to go back to it very soon to just declare those things again, but do it in a way of submitting to those names and truths of God. You are my truest friend. Can you say that? Have you been a loyal friend to God this week? Can you call and declare him as your truest friend? The first line in verse 1 says, you're my medicine. And when I first sang that, I'm like, that's cheesy. That's too worldly. But I'm like, more than anything, I'd like God to be my medicine. To give me what ails me when he knows it's right. And to take care of me. To administer to me. God, I trust in you and I can rest secure in you. You can only do that if you fully submit to God. God who is trustful, God who is just is one we can trust in. And the fourth thing is what I'm going to bring us back to what I started with in Luke 6. Jesus said, but when God returns, he's going to be looking for faith on the earth. Have faith in him. When all looks lost, when it looks like Pharaoh's coming after us, when it looks like another army's coming in from this direction, when it looks like my kids have walked away from God, trust in him. Have faith in him. Because his timeless ways have proven that they are worthy to follow. This is the God who is just. It's a deep topic to sink your teeth into, so don't rush it by on one Sunday. Take your time and worship this God and see what he will do for your soul.